everybody, welcome back to Challenge the Call with Max and Avery. I'm your host, Max.
And I am Avery. How are you guys?
All right, so we are going back to our highest paid coaches series. This week we have offensive coordinators. So, Avery, you ready to get into it?
Let's do it.
All right. The highest paid offensive coordinator for the upcoming 2024 college football season is Notre Dame's Mike Denbrock. Guess how much he's getting paid? I know you can probably see it, but
yeah. How much, Max? How much?
He is getting paid $2.1 million. Only offensive coordinator over two. Like, as a coordinator, $2 million. That is absolutely insane.
Yeah, you think about it, and it's like, okay, like you got your head coaches. You would think $2 million is like the low side of a head coach in college football. This guy's a coordinator, and rightfully so that he gets 2.1 mil, because what was he last year? He was LSU's offensive coordinator. What was LSU ranked last year? Number one
in total offense.
So when you're thinking about that, and Notre Dame was ranked 29th last year without him there. So when you're thinking about that, he's going to bring a special kind of connotation to Notre Dame, you would think.
I would think so. The biggest question I'm going to have about this, like, yes, definitely worth his money. You know, if you are the number one producer in total offense in college football in the 2023 season at LSU, how much of that, though, is your capabilities as a coordinator, and how much of that is having Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner, second draft pick in the NFL draft? Like, you know what I mean? Does losing Jake Daniel, is that going to hurt his offensive production at Notre Dame?
You know, you would think so, but they also got a really great transfer quarterback coming in from Duke and Riley Leonard. So before Riley Leonard got hurt last year, they were talking about him being a draft pick in the 2023 draft class. So, like, you would think, okay, like this guy, he's leaving Duke, a middle of the pack ACC school. He's coming in, and this is going to be the guy that's teaching him and coaching him up. So I think that's why he's getting paid that much.
It makes sense. I mean, if you have the number one production of total offense the season before, you're at Notre Dame, which, you know, like, is a high money, high competition level school. It makes sense that you're going to get paid.
For sure.
Coming in next year at $1.85 million, we have Andy Ludwig from Utah. This one is a little more interesting because he's the second highest paid offensive coordinator. In the 2023 season, his offense was 92nd in total offensive production.
You got to take that with a grain of salt. I mean, you think about it, Cameron Rising got hurt last year. Utah's offense struggled with they started a freshman, I forgot his name, but they started a freshman a couple of games. So, like, you got to take injuries into effect. I think if you want the whole picture, you kind of got to go back to its 2022 and 2021 seasons where Utah was a top 10 team with Cameron Rising. And Cameron Rising's coming back. Yes. He got granted a medical red shirt, so he'll be back.
There you go. Utah won the Pac-12 conference a couple of his years, didn't they? Like, they've won it back-to-back fairly recently, didn't they?
I think it was 2021, 2022. They won it back-to-back. Okay. And then Oregon won it last year. So, yeah. And the reason I was trying to figure out why I knew this guy for the longest time, but it's because he was offensive coordinator at Wisconsin for a couple of years. And I was like, okay, that's why I know the name.
He's been a little bit all over the place, it looks like. Vanderbilt before he got to Utah, Wisconsin before that, San Diego State, California, Utah, way back when, Oregon, Fresno State, Cal Poly, Boise State, just as a quarterback's coach there, though. And then Augustana even, NAIA, I believe, or maybe D2.
Yeah.
But, like, that is crazy. Just, like, this man's been around the block a little bit.
And you think, right? Because some of these guys, you're like, okay, are they getting paid this much because they're going to take over as a head coach someday, right? Well, this guy, he seems pretty comfortable just being an OC at the college level. I mean, you got to think, like, 2013, I think that's when Wisconsin was, like, at their peak with Russell Wilson, Jonathan Taylor, stuff like that. And you would have thought he would have got a head coaching job somewhere. But he left and he went to Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, there it is, you know.
Fair enough. And I mean, I could understand that. That is almost your mentality of I like my X's and O's. I like calling a football game. I don't want the responsibilities of a head coach because, as our head coach will tell you, all you do as a head coach is you put out fires.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot less football and it's a lot more like budgeting, administrative. Like, there's so much that goes into being a head coach that just has nothing to do with football. So, some of these guys, like maybe Andy Ludwig, who could be a head coach, probably just doesn't want to deal with the headache. He just wants to call his offense. He wants to do his X's and O's, and he wants to, coach college football.
And that's fair. I mean, at the end of the day, there it is. All right, who's the next guy we got on our list?
With 1.75 million, we have Garrett Riley from Clemson. Clemson's offense was 50th in total offense in the 2023 season, but this kind of makes sense a little bit too. Just with thinking back to last week when we had our highest paid head coaches series, number 2 in that list was Dabo Swinney.
Right.
Typically, when you have really high paid head coaches, you probably just have higher paid staff underneath you in general. So Clemson's OC being one of the highest paid OCs just makes sense.
Well, and with Garrett Riley, 2 things pop out. One, Garrett Riley is the brother of Lincoln Riley. So there's the runs in the family, right? Brother of Lincoln Riley, one of the highest paid head coaches that we talked about last week. And then 2, if you look at his previous jobs before he took Clemson, he was the mastermind behind that TCU offense with Max Duggan that went on that Cinderella run. So if you really think about it, he's kind of put in the work the last few years. And he's only 34 years old. We just talked about, okay, are you going to be a head coach in the future? Garrett Riley, if he has success at Clemson, I guarantee he's going to be coaching a football team somewhere as a head man.
Easily. And a big thing, too, that I want to point out with the comparison between Andy Ludwig at Utah and Garrett Riley at Clemson here is you were talking about when Ludwig was at Wisconsin, Wisconsin had his best year. And then you mentioned names like Russell Wilson, Jonathan Taylor, and that's all good and great. That makes your job as a coordinator easy. But when we're talking about that Max Duggan TCU year, we're not talking about, like, where's Max Duggan right now? He doesn't have a Super Bowl ring. I don't think he's on an active roster in the Super Bowl right now. So that's just like a little bit of a difference right there of like, hey, you went to the college football playoffs, you won a game in the college football playoffs, and like you didn't even have that same kind of NFL caliber quarterback. He got drafted or signed. I don't even remember which it was.
Drafted in the 7th round by the Chargers, and he's still on the Chargers. Yeah, I mean, he just got cut halfway through the year, but they brought him back when Justin Herbert got hurt last year. Remember?
Okay, so he is on a roster. I'll give him that. But, it's a whole different story than having Russell Wilson. Like, you look back at having Russell Wilson, and it's like, okay, there's a guy who was a starting quarterback in the NFL for years, has a Super Bowl ring, like not to discredit Ludwig at all. Like, I think he's earning his money fine. I think he deserves what he's getting paid. But at the same time, I mean, like we said with our very first guy at Notre Dame, Mike Denbrock, was that just Jaden Daniels? Like, are you just profiting off of Jaden Daniels' success? And we will find that out. And I think so. I just have a lot of respect for Garrett Riley. I think he's definitely earning his money just because, like you said, at TCU, he had Max Duggan, and he made it work. Yep. Great offensive coordinators will make it work with what they got. Moving on, next in our list at $1.65 million, we have Charlie Wise Jr. at Ole Miss. Their total offensive production, they were 13th last year. So that is a deserving number in my, just right there off the bat. That is definitely deserving of being one of the big dogs.
Well, and you talk about Charlie Weiss as well. I mean, one, his dad is a longtime legend head coach at Notre Dame in Charlie Weiss. And also, if you think about it, he's the offense coordinator for who? Ole Miss. Who else was on the list? Lane Kiffin. So he is the guy under Lane Kiffin. Like, you think about it, it all translates into the same aspect.
Well, and that brings up a good point too, because is Kiffin an offensive guy or is he a defensive guy? Yeah. So you get into these scenarios sometimes with coordinators where you're like, okay, whose offense is it though?
True.
You know what I mean? Like, is this truly Charlie Weiss's Jr.'s offense? Or is this Lane Kiffin's offense that he's expecting him to run? Because those are two completely different stories.
And that's the hard part because you could take two different takes on that, right? You got Iowa last year. Look at Iowa last year. You got Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz. Who was running that offense? Was it Brian? Was it Kirk? Like who had more say? And then even at the NFL level, we can talk about our former offensive coordinator. What was his
Nagy
name?
or
Not
coordinator.
coordinator. Packer guy.
Yeah,
Um, like was that really his offense when he was the quarterback coach at Green Bay? It wasn't. No, I mean it was Matt LaFleur's, and then he went to Chicago and he failed. And so, like at the end of the day, whose offense is it truly? You never really know until you
for
get
sure.
those
Like
jobs.
that is definitely that is definitely the difference of what you're going to have of like, yeah, who's offensive. But there's still something to be said with that though too, because you can still earn your money running someone else's offense.
True.
You still have to be good enough to. I don't know who's play. That's a whole other aspect of it is who's calling the offense.
Right.
Because like you talk in the NFL situation, you look at the Chiefs. Is Matt Nagy calling plays in the
No.
Chiefs?
Uh,
He calls first and second down. But
yeah.
you know who calls the money downs? The downs that make
Indeed.
the game like matter? Andy Reid.
Yep. And the former Bears offense coordinator, Luke Getzey.
That's
That
what
I
gets
don't know
me.
why I was blanking on that. We knew his name, but yeah, Luke Getzey. But yeah, so we'll see. If Charlie Weiss Jr. can make a name for himself in the future.
Definitely. We'll see. And like we said with just Ole Miss in general, like 13th offensive production, like let's see if they can continue that. And if they do, I think good things are coming for them. Now, moving on to 1.5 million, we got a couple coaches. We've got Kirby Moore from Missouri and then Bobby Petrino from Arkansas. Kirby Moore at Missouri, he was there last year, 2023 season. They were 28th in total offense. Bobby Petrino was actually at Texas A&M, and they were 48th in total offense. So both in the top 50 there, which isn't too bad. Bobby Petrino is going to have to do it again in a new location. He's doing it at Arkansas now, who had 105th in total offensive production last year, hence why they are bringing in somebody else, get
Right.
replaced at that rate. But what do you think about either of these guys or either of these offenses?
So the offense with Missouri, it goes back. Is it Kirby Moore's offense or is it Eli Drinkwitz's offense? Right. So I don't have much to say on that. We'll see. Time will tell. But also, Bobby Petrino is a very interesting story because he was actually Arkansas's head coach from 2008 until 2011. And then there was a scandal that happened at Arkansas. He got canned because of the scandal. Well, they just brought him back as the OC. So it'll be very interesting to see what goes on and what transpires with Bobby Petrino. Not as the head man at Arkansas, but as the OC. It'll be
Does
very
that
interesting.
does that make you nervous as like a head coach at Arkansas to bring in the former head coach who was there, who like won a couple bowl games? Looks like he had a 37-17 record overall. Like, does that make you nervous at all? Of like, oh man, am I going to be replaced?
Well, I think to me, yeah, because like if you look at his record, his last year at Arkansas, he was 11-2 in the SEC at that point. Like that's scary. And then now you're just the coordinator. How are you supposed to react to that as a head coach? You're like, do you think that was his hire or do you think that was the school board's hire?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
He was also a head coach for. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at his total head coaching record. He's 137-71. Like that's
Mhm.
pretty good as a head coach.
Yeah. That's not
But
bad
yeah,
at all.
no, he's not bad at
137.
all.
I think he probably would rank on the all-time coaching list. I don't have that up today, but I guarantee he ranks on that list. No, it's going to be interesting to see if and this is going to be a big thing too. This is a guy with a lot of head coaching experience. If he can take the back seat and not be the guy, and if he can come out and he's like, okay, like this is your offense at the end of the day, this is your team, let me just put my sprinkle on this. It'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah, this is where you can get into some issues with the head coach and the offensive coordinator, maybe of whose offense are we running here. Like when you add a longtime head coach who's now your coordinator, like you're gonna especially who is a head coach at the school you're currently at, like
Mm-hmm.
he's probably gonna say, hey, I'm running my offense. Like I
Right.
don't care what you're doing. Like you said, he went 11-2 his last year in the SEC at Arkansas. He's gonna be like, hey, look at my resume. Like I'm calling this shit.
And that's going to be hard. That's going to be hard. Time will tell.
Time will tell. Moving on to $1.4 million. We've got four coaches in this category. We'll go one by one through here. Mike Bobo from Georgia, fifth in total offense last year. Makes sense.
Yeah. He's kind of a fast burner. As he started off slow, a GA in 1999, quarterbacks coach. Took some time off, longtime Georgia OC, but he was just the Georgia offensive assistant or analyst last year in 2022. So this is unique.
That's
I
2 years
mean,
ago.
2 years ago. This is unique to see kind of where he stands. But it's like Kirby Smart, I know he's a defensive minded guy. So it has to be his offense, right? You would think. Like, of course, Kirby's going to bring in, okay, hey, I've been around the game long enough. I can kind of coach both sides of the ball. But you got to think this is Bobo's team. This
For sure.
his
I
offense.
mean, he's coached at Georgia for a long, long time, like you said. Like he was a GA in 1999, and then he was a quarterbacks coach for 5 years. It looks like he was an offensive coordinator slash quarterbacks coach for another stint. Then he went to Colorado, South Carolina. Then he was an offensive coordinator at a few different places. South Carolina, where he also became interim head coach for a season.
Mm-hmm.
Auburn, he was an offensive coordinator. So it almost looks like he just wanted to get back to Georgia, and his way to get back there was, I'll be an offensive analyst at Georgia for a year. Kind of, I don't know what his reasoning was for leaving Georgia back when, probably because he was the head coach at Colorado State.
Yeah.
So, moved up to that head coaching gig, maybe didn't cut it, went back down to a coordinator. I bet you he just wanted to go back to Georgia. And so that's why. And I mean, look at when he did it. 2022. Who was winning the national, football playoffs, championship, whatever, like in 2022? It's fucking Georgia. That was
Yep.
one of their back-to-back years. So that's a good time to get back in on it.
That's for sure. And the funny thing, I'm looking at it, and I can remember like he was a player at Georgia too. Like he was a quarterback. That's probably why he started off as a GA there. Also, if you look, I mean, Georgia's quarterback from 2001 to through 2006, Matt Stafford, hell of a quarterback, right? Hell of a quarterback. So he coached Matt Stafford. 2022, he probably had a big impact on Stetson Bennett, another quarterback. He's got a solid 5-star quarterback in Carson Beck. So I think
Definitely.
that'll be interesting to see.
Now, I'm going to go past these next couple guys real quick. So we're still in the 1.4 million category, but next I want to talk about Oregon's Will Stein. The reason I want to talk about this is because we just talked about Mike Bobo being fifth in total offense last year. Will Stein was second in total offense at Oregon last year. Of course, once again, you make that argument of, okay, is that Bo Nix? Bo Nix running the offense. Like, are you kind of just, is that what is carrying you right now? But we will see. Interesting thing with Will Stein, too, is he's only been an OC. Last year was his first year as an OC. The year before that, he was a co-offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean,
So that he's young, he's new, he's fresh to this.
very similar to Gilbert Riley, like 34, still pretty new of this game. That's an impressive jump to go from University of Texas, San Antonio, co-offensive coordinator, to being the offensive coordinator at the Oregon Ducks. That's a huge jump. But I also remember the last few years, UTSA killed it. And Frank Harris, their quarterback, killed it. And I remember watching UTSA because I used to kind of bet on them every now and then. And I remember like I would always hammer the over if I saw UTSA versus Rice. And I was like, their offense is firing. Well, this is the guy that did it. And that's
This
why
is the
Oregon
offensive
brought it
guy.
in.
Well, and he was their pass game coordinator too for a cut. Like 2020, 2021, he was UTSA's passing game coordinator. Then he became co-coordinator, and from there moved up to Oregon. So, I mean, yeah, he's very, very fresh as a true offensive coordinator. He's also the quarterbacks coach at Oregon. So this will be interesting to see with the Bo Nix leaving and just him being so young and so fresh in the coordinating game. How does he move on?
Right.
Now, the next couple of coaches we have in the $1.4 million category make a little bit of less sense to me. Two Big Ten coaches, Rutgers and Nebraska. We've got Kirk Sirioka. something like that for Rutgers, and then Marcus Satterfield from Nebraska. The reason these two stand out from Georgia and Oregon's coordinators is last year their total offenses were 115th for Nebraska and then 120th for Rutgers. Not good. Not good at all. So seeing them appear in the top of this highest paid coordinators list is almost like, what the fuck?
Well, I want you to look at something too. If you look at a lot of these Big Ten offensive coordinators, they are in the hundreds for offense. That just goes to show you what type of league that we always say. The Big Ten is a defensive minded league, right? So 115th, take it with a grain of salt. 120th, take it with a grain of salt. It doesn't necessarily mean what you do in the like offensive standpoint if you can get enough production out of that. So, I mean, take it with a grain of salt. But I know Kirk. I don't know much about Kirk, whatever his last name is.
Yeah.
But Marcus Satterfield, I do know a bit about Marcus Satterfield. I mean, he came from South Carolina. He was South Carolina's offense coordinator. Came into Nebraska. He was the OC. To be honest, man, I think this is a match made in heaven with Matt Rule, and I think we're going to see some production out of Marcus Satterfield. He scares me because like their offense wasn't that bad at the end of the year last year. Nebraska started to turn it around. Like almost lost. We lost to Nebraska, didn't we? Last year, or was it the year before? No,
No,
it
year
was that
before.
last second interception.
Yeah, you're thinking year before.
But well, and he was the OC the year before. So like
What?
I'm scared like they're making a change.
He was not the OC the year before. The year before, he was at South Carolina.
That's fair, yeah. So
So here's he last year he was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Nebraska. This upcoming season, he's actually going to be the offensive coordinator and tight ends coach. So his title did change ever so slightly at Nebraska for this upcoming year. He doesn't deal with the quarterbacks anymore. He's going to deal with the tight ends. And part of you kind of wonders like that's a bit of an interesting move. Is that just hires that they made? Is that just shifting things around from the guys that they brought in? Or is that so that he can focus more on coordinating the offense? Because coaching the tight ends is probably a lot easier. Not probably. It's a lot easier than coaching the quarterbacks.
that's fair too. Yeah. I mean, probably so he can focus more on the offense because they probably want a bigger impact on the offensive side of the ball.
Fair enough. But going to Rutgers, Kirk, too, he was also only been at Rutgers for a couple years as an OC. He was Minnesota's offensive coordinator the year before that. And then he's been at Penn State, was at Minnesota again as well. So he understands the Big Ten. Like he's been around in the Big Ten. And he was the co-offensive coordinator at Rutgers back in 2008 through 2010 as well. So he's been at Rutgers before too. So he's got a little bit of history there with them. But I don't know, just when I see some of these highest paid, I know they're Big Ten and Big Ten values defense and whatnot, but even then, like give some of that money to the defensive coordinator then. Pay the coaches that you're like caring about if that's going to be the case.
Well, and that's going to be our next episode.
That will be the next episode. But moving down, we've got our $1.3 million. There's only one coach, and it is Nick Sheridan from Alabama. And I say from Alabama. He was actually at Washington as the tight ends coach, though. So this one's a little weird. Washington's total offensive production was 12th last year, but I don't know what to think about that because, like I said, Nick Sheridan was the tight ends coach. He wasn't the coordinator. So I don't know. This will be interesting to see, like, do you earn that money?
For sure. And what a climb. This is also a guy that's a little younger too, but look at the climb. In just 14 years, he went from being a quarterback coach at a high school in Michigan to being the offensive coordinator at Alabama in 14 years. So that's like what that could be you in 14 years, right? I mean, that's very, very similar in an aspect. Like, so like, oh, in 14 years at 36 years old or 30.
I was also not a quarterback at Michigan
That's
like Nick Sheridan was. So I don't know, maybe a little different, but
I think a lot of it too is, and I'm wondering how much, because we talked about the success of the offense coordinator for Notre Dame, right? And Jaden Daniels, right?
yep.
If you look back at Nick Sheridan right here, I mean, Indiana, 2020, 2021. Who was the quarterback for Indiana in 2020, 2021? Michael Penix Jr. I mean, I of course he was the tight ends coach at Washington, but how much of an impact did he bring to that aspect as well? So it'll be interesting to see if he can succeed without like with Jalen Milrow instead of like a Michael Penix, and see how he adapts to a different type of quarterback.
That is true. Not only a different type of quarterback, but like I don't know if you're seeing much drop off from Michael Penix to Jaden Milrow. Like you still have a very high level quarterback who gets the job done and is going to play
Different play
like
style.
we talk about losing Bo Nix, we talk about losing Jaden Daniels, we talk about losing like all these superstar talented quarterback. Like, is he truly losing a superstar talented quarterback, or did he just go to another team with another one?
Yeah, and that's true, and that's kind of Kalen DeBoer too, if you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I like this a little bit. This one will be really interesting to see because he did just kind of move with DeBoer, but not from coordinator to coordinator, but tight ends coach to
Yeah,
coordinator. That's a leap. That is a leap, if you ask me.
it's a big leap.
I'm gonna be coaching the O line before I ever jump straight to a coordinator. I'll tell you that much. Next up on the list at a long one, 1.325 million. That is $1,325,000. We've got Kyle Flood from Texas. Last year, their total offense, they were ninth in total offense, which makes sense. Texas was killing it.
Yep. This is interesting. He does have some head coaching experience. He was the head coach from 2012 to 2015 at Rutgers. Then he went to be an offensive line coach for the Atlanta Falcons, and then went
An
back to
assistant
Bama.
O line coach.
Yeah. He went through the Nick Saban rehab though. So I mean, he did coach the offensive line at Alabama from 2019 to 2020. So I like that stamp of approval. The Nick Saban, hey, he was former head coach. He changed his ways. He's going to be a good offense coordinator, good head coach someday. And here he is, man. I mean, Texas was rolling last year.
Yeah.
Texas is back.
That's what I was just going to say is like, look how Texas has changed. Like, he's been at Texas since 2021. Look at what they did last year after getting his offense down. He's probably got everything installed with the seniors by this point. They know his full offense. He's not holding out things on them. Like, look at what he can do with an offense when you give him a few years to really just teach it, let the guys grow in it and develop in it, and then boom, go out and fucking compete in the college football playoffs.
Yeah.
All right. Next up at 1.25 million, we've got a few coaches. We've got, please move your cursor, Avery. I can't read that name. We've got Bush Hammond at Kentucky, who was actually at Boise State. They were ranked 26th in total offense. So that's an interesting one right there. Just because Boise State, that's non-Power 5. So he made the jump from non-Power 5 straight to Power 5 offensive coordinator.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I don't have much on Bush Handman. I mean, we'll see how he produces in the SEC.
Looks like he's had a couple gigs as an offensive coordinator, Washington being his most notable one in 2018, 2019. But other than that, like, yeah, he'll be this will be interesting to see how he does here at Kentucky. Yeah, I don't have much else to say on him either. We've got Alex Atkins, Florida State, 52nd in total offense last year. Once again, we kind of get into that with as many guys as Florida State graduated. How is this going to look?
Sure. The interesting with Atkins, right, is a lot of these guys you see former quarterback. This guy, former guard, offensive guard. I like that. I mean, that's just a different dynamic. You got to think, okay, hey, you hire this guy. He made his bread and butter as an offensive lineman. Maybe this is going to help Florida State run the ball a little bit better.
That's true. And he coaches, he's an OC and O-line coach instead of an OC and QB coach, which you see that from time to time too. I think Kyle Flood's that we just looked at was the same story. He's the O-line coach. But yeah, normally you see such a heavy quarterback influence as the coordinator, and especially in that playing history. And it makes sense just because, like, we talk about how important the quarterback position is in football. Like, there's rules, so many rules in football that are there just to protect the quarterback alone. Because without a quarterback, you kind of lose the whole game. Because they themselves are almost like the player liaison of the coordinator. Like they are the offensive liaison between the offensive coordinator and the play. Like they have to know all the plays. They have to know the run game, the pass game. They have to know where the line is blocking, where the receivers are running, how everything is worked. Like they make good coordinators because in their playing careers, they learn all of those things. Whereas, Alex Atkins, when he was an O lineman at Tennessee Martin, he was probably just learning where to go in the run game, at least as a guard, hopefully for the whole line. The whole line should know a little bit of like where the tackles and centers go to. But in the pass game, he's not really paying attention to where the receivers are running and shit. He's knowing if he's sliding left, sliding right, man on, or, like that's all he cares about.
That's fair. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if he earns his money this year.
Definitely. With the way Florida State's going to change and just everything that's happening in general with that like this will be a good one to watch, and I like it. All right. Last guy in the $1.25 million category, we've got Phil Longo?
Phil Longo.
Longo from Wisconsin. 69th in total offense last year. Let's see. Where he was at North Carolina before Wisconsin. He's only been this will be his second year coming up at Wisconsin. Before that, he was at Ole Miss. Before that, he was at Sam Houston State. Slippery Rock, which I don't even know what that is. Is that a D3? D2. It's a D2.
Okay. No, Phil Longo, man. I'm reading a little bit about him. He is a air raid offense practitioner. Mm-hmm. So in Wisconsin, that's interesting.
That's very interesting.
Luke Fickell was similar hire though. Like Cincinnati, they did run the air raid in Cincinnati, and he's trying to translate it, so he brings in one of his guys, right? I think it's interesting. The only thing I have a concern with, like Longo, is he has one head coaching experience, and of course he's a coordinator, right? So like it shouldn't even be that bad. But it was at LaSalle, and I don't even know if that's D2 or D3.
It's Division I.
Is it Division I?
NCAA Division I football championship subdivision.
Okay.
So FCS.
Yep. And he went 7-14. Interesting to see, but
it's not great, but also like there's an aspect of, like we said, the head coaching gig is way, way different than the coordinator gig. There's a lot of other things you got to worry about and deal with. And, maybe he wasn't getting to be as much of an influence on the offense as he wanted to, because as a head coach, you obviously have an offensive coordinator under you. Offensive coordinator might be the guy calling the plays. Maybe he sat back and let him do so, and that ended up losing them game. Like, who knows what was going on there. Yeah. It will be interesting to see, though, just an air raid guy in Wisconsin, along with Luke Fickell, like being air raid kind of guys, especially in a time where USC is joining the Big Ten. Like, is Big Ten going to lose its defensive identity little by little?
I don't think so, because there's still schools like Iowa that will shut that down real quick. Michigan, Ohio.
Shut that down until when? Phil Parker retires. Tim Lester's coming in, going to increase the pass game.
That's fair. Yeah, that's true. Speaking of Tim Lester, we got we're at the 1.1 million, and Tim Lester's on this list. Let's talk about him.
Tim Lester is making $1.1 million as Iowa's offensive coordinator this year. Last year, he did not coach an offense. He was an analyst for the Green Bay Packers. So he was in the NFL. But as we've talked about before in this podcast, he was a longtime Western Michigan head coach. He also was a head coach at Elmhurst and
Syracuse.
Syracuse. Well, was he a head coach at Syracuse, or was he
quarterbacks go? Well, no, he was. No, yeah.
He was an offensive coordinator for a couple years at Syracuse. I was just thinking of his head coaching stints. St. Joseph's. Yeah, that's what it is, D2.
Okay.
So he's been at all the different divisions. He's won at all the different divisions. Western Michigan was pretty average, 37 to 32. Like, not the greatest, not the worst. But once again, that's being a head coach. You know, a little bit of a different gig than an offensive coordinator. But what do you think about this?
I mean, 1.1 is a lot to give, especially at Iowa for an offensive coordinator. I don't remember what Brian Ferentz was making last year. But, I mean, like we talked about on this podcast, there's the only direction to go is up at this point, because we were at the bottom of the barrel at 130th last year. And
Ferentz made $850K.
Yeah, so I mean, they did pay a little bit more for Tim Lester to come in, but he comes in with so much different experience. Also, Tim Lester, every single year at Western Michigan, when he was the head coach, his offense ranked in the top 35. So, I mean, that's impressive as itself. So, I think Tim Lester kind of deserves that 1.1 base salary to come in. Hey, let's see what you can do with the Iowa Hawkeyes offense.
Well, and there's an aspect to this too, especially with Iowa, whose offense last year was 130th in total offense, which is last. Like that is the lowest you can possibly be. It's 130th out of 130. Um, there's an aspect to it of like we have to pay our coordinator more because we want to bring in the best guy. He might not have earned that money yet or anything, but we want to give it to him, get in a real good guy, and hope that he works to earn that money. You know,
Right.
sometimes the money's got to come before the job comes or before the earning potential of it a little bit. And so I think that's what I was trying to do with Leicester is they increase the offensive coordinator salary. They're like, hey, we're going to pay somebody this much because we need a guy who we think is going to be great here. And we want them to, not be turned away by a lower salary or something. We want to stroke an ego maybe and get a guy in here that's going to do some stuff. So hopefully he will do some stuff for us. Yeah, we'll talk plenty about Iowa's offense probably in future videos and shit. So no need to go too in depth on it. But also in that category, we have got Chip Lindsey from North Carolina, whose offense was seventh in total offense last year. Brian Lindgren,
Lindridge.
something like that. Michigan State. He came to Michigan State from Oregon State, who was 45th in total offense. And then here's an interesting one: Seth Luttrell, Oklahoma, whose offense was third last year in production, but he was only an offensive analyst last year at Oklahoma.
Interesting. Interesting to see. I want to talk about Chip Lindsey a little bit, and then we can move on from him. This is the first coach I noticed that spent a significant amount of time at the high school football level, which is always really cool to see. I mean, he started in 1997 as an assistant coach at Springville High School.
Not the
19
Springville that we attended, because
yeah, Springville, Alabama High School, and then 1999 assistant as well. Moved to Deschler, and then Colbert Heights, Alabama, where he coached 2005, 2006. Hoover High School as the offense coordinator, and then Les Lear High School in Georgia. And then he became the quarterback coach in 2010. He's 51 and 23 at the high school football level. Pretty successful, man. I like to see those type of stories. Maybe because that's what I'm going to
you
resonate.
want to be a coach someday, and you're hoping that you can start coaching high school and get there. Yeah.
Yep. But I definitely wanted to highlight that. So he had that slow climb from grace. We talk about these fast burners, Gilbert Riley. There's another one, Kirby Moore, and we talked about those
Well,
type of guys.
you want, like, before you get too far into it, fast burner Seth Luttrell, who we're about to talk, like offensive
Yeah,
analyst at Oklahoma. Here he comes his OC.
true. Yeah, and that's fair too. Yeah, I mean, moving from offensive analyst to the OC is huge. So like he does have some coaching experience, right? He was North Texas. So like that's where I'm like, okay, well, he was a fast burner and then he slowed off. But at the same time, he's back at it after 1 year. That's impressive. That's very impressive.
Yeah, and he doesn't have any previous. He played at Oklahoma, but like he never coached at Oklahoma before, so
No,
it's not like he was just trying to get. I mean, maybe he was just trying to get back to where he played at. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't 100% know how impressive it is to go from offensive analyst to offensive coordinator because, like, what exactly is an offensive analyst? What does that job really mean? What do they do? Like, I could see them having a very little hand in things, and I could see them having a very big hand in things. Like, I think it's a very undefined kind of title.
and that's where it's hard because like Tim Lester, how involved was he with the Green Bay Packers last year? And like a couple of years back, we had Doug Peterson when he got fired by the Philadelphia Eagles on the Chicago Bears roster as an offense analyst. And then he right away got a job at Jacksonville. So sometimes I'm like, is that just a placeholder because they know the guy that they had is going to move on the year after and then they can just slide him into that role? It's interesting. It's a different dynamic.
It is a very different dynamic. I truly do think it is one of those titles that just kind of is there for the sake of like there's certain rules that you can only have so many coaches like working for a team, and I think they kind of bypass that by calling them analysts.
Right.
So in reality, they're probably just as much as a coach as any other coach. True, like he's probably like the assistant O-line coach or the assistant quarterback coach, but he's called an offensive analyst because they can't legally have more than so many coaches, like true designated coaches. Also, from reading job descriptions, because I look at a lot of football job postings, a lot of the things I believe offensive analysts kind of are generally required to do is a lot of scouting. So I think they watch a lot of opponent film, they break down a lot of opponent film, and they kind of like give reports on the opponents and stuff, and maybe even give suggestions as far as like here's how you should beat it. If they're a Seth Luttrell kind of guy, they're probably breaking down the film and saying, hey, here's how you beat these things. And that's probably what makes it like, yeah, let's make this guy offensive coordinator. He's basically been telling us what to do the whole time as an analyst.
Right. And that makes sense.
It does.
Right.
Now, moving into our last guy, at $1 million flat, we decided to cut the list right there. We don't need to talk about a bunch of people who make less than $1 million right now, but $1 million, we got Robert Sale. I don't know how you want, or Rob Sal or Sale, however you want to say it, from Florida. His offense last year was 46. Now, he is also an asterisk because he is a co-coordinator, co-offensive coordinator.
I think I know why you wanted to talk about this guy.
Giants?
I'm looking at his like record and everything and all the career history. And Alabama, 2007 through 2011, strength and conditioning assistant and offense analyst. That's very interesting, Max. Let's talk about that. Like with him moving up the chain from there, how hard? What does that look like?
First of all, being a strength and conditioning assistant and offensive analyst, like I don't even think that's a thing anymore. Like that's two different positions. You don't get guys that do both. At lower levels, like at Division 3 level, maybe some Division 2, you will see football coaches that also kind of head the football strength and conditioning. But more often than not, if you're a strength guy, you are a strength guy. You don't really do anything with like the actual offense and whatnot. You just kind of so I almost see this as like maybe he was a strength and conditioning assistant who also did a little bit of film breakdown for them, a little bit of something else, another, or like I don't know what this truly means, but that is kind of interesting to see right there, just the doing both aspects back then.
Yeah.
But since then, this guy jumps around a little bit. It looks like he because you look at since that stint at Alabama there, that was 4 years. He's been to McNeese State, only there a couple years. Well, I guess his title just changed. He was there 3 years. Then he went to Georgia. Very next year was at Louisiana Monroe. Very next year was at Arizona State. Next year was at Louisiana. So he's been jumping around from place to place. Like every year is at a new spot. That's kind of interesting to see as well.
Sometimes I wonder if that's how you move up in the coaching world.
Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, but it depends.
And also, another interesting thing I just realized, he was offensive lineman at LSU from 1998 to 2002. But did he just not coach for 4 years? Like, I mean, they have his Catholic high school coup that he was the offensive line, but did he just step out of coaching for 4 years right after? Interesting to see.
Maybe he got a degree. Well, let's see. Began his coaching career in 2006. Yeah, what about, does it say in his bio anywhere, like what he was doing in the interim? Not really. No. So maybe he was like a teacher or something. Like, I don't know what his degree was in. Maybe he, was a teacher, taught at the high school a little bit, and then they needed a coach, and they're like, hey, you want it? Or maybe he had another random degree and just kind of decided he wanted to get back into football. I mean, I'm sure that happens all the time. You get out of playing and an opportunity just kind of shows itself. I mean, like, look at me. I was never necessarily going on to be a football coach ever again or anything like that after like my student coaching career, and then just had to move home. There was an open opportunity and I fucking took it. Like maybe you just kind of fell into it and kept it rolling.
There we go. Rob Sales right there.
But that concludes our highest paid offensive coordinators. Thank you guys for watching. This one was a little different from the head coach one that we did. We will be coming at you next week with defensive coordinators. Also, keep tabs on our videos as we do other things. Next video we are going to be posting is going to be, we're going to get into the NFL a little bit. We're going to do the most winningest coaches in the NFL. So stay tuned for that.
All right, guys. Go like, support, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. You know the deal. And I always close it out. Bear down.